there is one way to escape the Tagia invasion, and that is to make their way to the moon. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today's video is the Moon Deeds by Palmer Pickering book review. This is the Star Children Saga, book number 1, and it's right here. Before we jump into it, I want to say a huge thank you to Palmer Pickering. Thank you so much for sending me book 1 Moon Deeds and book 2 Light Fighters, which you can see here on my left. It was very unnecessary but very much appreciated. Thank you so much for sending these my way. Before we jump into the review today, make sure you're checking that description box down below for links to my Discord and social media should you want to come along for the ride. Jumping into the book, Moon Deeds by Palmer Pickering was a sci fantasy which is packed full of information. In my opinion, very much a setup book leading to the next book, Light Fighters, which I'll read in early 2023, but it has a lot of promise and a lot is in this book, which is setting itself up for a really cool series continuation. Moon Deeds is told through a dual POV. We have 21-year-old siblings Tor and Cassidy, who are sort of becoming new adults and figuring out how to put themselves out there in the world. Tor has left home and is a sharpshooter for the good military group in this particular story, and he's left home, he's hardened up, and he thinks that Cassidy's gotten a little soft. Cassidy, on the other hand, has remained home with her mother in order to learn the ways of plant magic and healing. When a ruthless military group called the Tags threaten to take over the world, it becomes apparent that these siblings will have to find each other and work together in order to escape. Once the Tagia invasion is well underway, it does become clear that home is no longer safe and they need some way of escape. Cassidy remembers some old property deeds that have been left to her by her aunt, well, her and Tor by her aunt, on the moon, and she thinks maybe if they can get to the moon, they can figure out how to bring their parents there and work out the next steps once they get away from Tagia and safe from this current invasion. The moon is not all it's cracked up to be. It is overpopulated and undernourished. Will they really be safe here at all? Underlying their stay and the plot point, which is sort of buried a little bit in my opinion underneath the rest of the story, but is very much still there and very much still underlying the book, is the prophecy of the Star Children. One to lead, one to kill, and a traveler who will save humanity from the brutal dictatorship that they have just escaped. I can't go too much further into it without giving some spoilers away, so we'll stop there in terms of the plot. In my opinion, this book is a whole lot of setups, and I would probably argue that about 80% of this book is setting up for one hell of a climax coming up in the next series installment. There are 2 parts to this book. Throughout part 1, we do get to know Tor and Cassidy in their current lives and come to understand that the Tags or Tagia is the big bad. We also come to understand that Cassidy is much more sheltered than her brother, but is more knowledgeable when it does come to the shaman magic of the world, which is a fairly big part that underlies a lot of this first book. Very little of the actual plot is discussed within this first part, or this first sort of 30%, and it doesn't really come into play until much later. Part 2 takes us to the moon, and the plot of the Star Children sort of comes into play, like it's alluded to, but it's not fully developed during our time here. As the reader, we do get an overall look of how the politics and world of our character's new home works, and understand that not everything is as they initially thought. We do get introduced to several different characters and species in the second part of the book, which I presume will form a bigger picture as the series progresses, but whose stories were a little bit disjointing in my opinion in book 1. Once our characters were set up, I was quite charmed by some of the dynamics that Palmer Pickering has put into play. For example, I was very taken by Cassidy's innocence and having to really learn how the world is working by going through something fairly traumatic and having to think on her feet and understanding the emotional turmoil that would take place when those sort of events are happening, but pulling through and starting to pull things together and just being able to push through and be a bigger person and play a bigger part while you're still sort of growing up. And I thought that was really well done throughout this book. I also liked that we have this character, so Tor, the brother, who's quite hardened, military mindset, very disciplined, and we got to see his vulnerabilities. He thinks of himself as this big protector, but we as the reader were made aware that he's still quite young and still quite naive himself, and I thought that was lovely to put in a book which is dealing with some heavier themes. In terms of other characters, a lot of our side characters were either likable or despicable where they needed to be, and I'm pretty curious about where some of these are headed. Another thing that Palmer Pickering does quite well is the descriptions of the world. The author has taken a significant amount of time to make the reader understand how everything works both at home and now on the moon. There is a whole universe out there, one that isn't overly safe, and the Star Children's prophecy is looking more and more terrifying by the minute. The last thing I'll mention here is the subtle uses of magic. While this feels very space opera-y as a book because we are sort of set in space and on the moon, the plant magic, like I was alluding to earlier, does bring a comforting fantasy feel to this world, and I appreciate that as a fantasy reader who is trying to break into the sci-fi sphere. This was very good for me while I was jumping out of my comfort zone in September. I think the setup is most definitely there. I think the criticisms here are that the book can be quite slow because it is a lot of setup, but as you progress, those layers build and it makes it more and more intriguing to want to get to book 2. So I'm very much looking forward to getting to book 2 in 2023. I'll probably read it physically. I did this one on audio and some of the narration didn't quite work for me. The depiction of Cassidy as a character irked me until I got used to it in the narration style, so I think I'll pick this one up physically and give that one a go in a different format. I will say, if you like a cliffhanger ending, you are in for a treat, because in the last couple of sentences I was like, wait, what? And it was just one of those endings where you just sort of had a bit of a mind blow moment. So looking forward to what book 2 brings. That was Moon Deeds by Palmer Pickering. What do you think? Are you going to pick this one up? Have you read it? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, then click subscribe at your will, and I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.